over the last 6 months since we've been coming to Parliament Square. Reform of party funding.
Reform of party funding.
So that members of Parliament. Act in the interests of those who elect them.
Act in the interests of those who elect them.
Rather than the 1% who bankroll them.
Rather than the 1% who bankroll them. Two.
We demand. Major democratic reform of the media.
Major democratic reform of the media.
To break the stranglehold of vested interests.
To break the stranglehold of vested interests.
Three. We demand. A fundamental overhaul of lobbying. And the way. Powerful economic interests. Inhabit the corridors of power within government. Four. We demand. The introduction of proportional representation. So that everyone's vote counts. Five. We demand. The MPs should not have conflicts of interest. From either paid employment. Or corporate shareholding. And finally, we demand a citizen-led constitutional convention. For real democracy.
Well, I don't know. They seem to me rather transitional demands. Yeah, no, I mean, myself personally, I don't have much faith in representative democracy at all. I mean, one of the interesting things actually is that, you know, for about 2,000 years at least, nobody thought elections had anything to do with democracy. You know, I mean, they started electing people to parliament, what is it, 1200s actually. You know, it's not a new thing. Nobody thought it had anything to do with democracy at the time. People used to think elections were the aristocratic way of selecting delegates for something. You know, actually the democratic way of choosing people was considered lottery. Everybody who's interested in public office throw their name in, take their name out of a hat. And, you know, actually Occupy Democracy in Athens, or Occupy Athens, actually came up with a proposal that every person who doesn't vote should be considered as voting against the representative system. Everybody's registered but doesn't vote anyway. Should be considered as voting against the representative system. So that proportion of delegates should be chosen by lottery, just randomly from the population. Yeah, so I would suggest that would be a good idea to add to this, my own personal contribution, because you know, as someone once said, what's that? 73. Yeah, what percent votes? 45% votes, 60% of registered. Yeah. Okay, so there we go. So 40% of the delegate, you know, of parliamentarians will be elected by lottery, like jury service.
On top of that, right? Whoever votes for the party that's not in, whoever votes for which party gets in, they're only voting to keep the other ones out, most of them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Most people are voting against rather than for. Yeah. I mean, definitely people on the left are only voting because they hate the Tories even more than the guys. Yeah.
Should we just stop doing it then?
What's that?
Should we just stop voting altogether?
I don't know. How do people feel about that? Well, I think that if we had this sortition system, then I think we should stop voting. You know, in the meantime, defensive voting, I guess, is a thing. It's really a judgment call as far as I'm concerned.
English Republic, flag of England, okay? Now, in 1649, March 1649, 800 women marched to the Tower of London to demand the release of John Lilburne, the leader of the Levellers, who was being imprisoned in the Tower. And those 800 women wore sea green dresses. This is the colour of sea green. This is their colour. It's your colour, actually, if you want to remember that point. Secondly, in the 19th century, the Chartist movement, which was a movement for vote for working class people, had a tricolour flag like this that was red and green and white. So we got 2 colours from the Chartists. And then the third colour was the suffragettes, who had a tricolour flag that was green and purple and white. So this is a combination of the Levellers and the Chartists and the suffragettes. This is the flag of your democracy. It's your tradition of struggle in this country. You may have forgotten it, but this is what we got. This is occupied democracy, therefore, all right, is in that tradition. That is our radical tradition. It's the tradition of a democratic revolution.
This history professor turned up from Royal Holloway University, and what he said was that he told us a lot about the original history of the Magna Carta, and it was also a big demand by ordinary people for more rights. It wasn't just about the lords and the barons. It was about, there was an army of 10,000 ordinary people there as well who had had enough of 150 years of Norman law. Norman law that would chop people's hands off and hang people for hunting in the forest and feeding their family. What this university professor said was that one thing we found out the other week when he came to talk at the Magna Carta Memorial was that there was a big constitutional, they asked everyone in this country a little while ago, do you want to change the constitution of this country? Did you know about this?
No.
Did anybody hear about this?
No.
Did the government asked everybody, was supposedly asked everyone, do you want to change the constitution of this country? Do you know the reason why you didn't hear about it?
Tell me only one. Don't speak here. Do what
Because it was hidden away in a place that not many people knew about. They didn't tell that many people, and when they did it, was at the same time as another big event. Sometimes we wonder whether they put them together, but it was at the same time as the Scottish referendum. So at the same time as they said, hey, people of Britain, do you want to change your constitution? Do you think things are unfair? Do you want things to be more democratic? Write in and tell us. So this thing, it was at the same time as the Scottish referendum. So the media all covered the Scottish referendum, didn't do anything about changing the whole constitution for Britain in general.
I want to say something just for myself. I'm actually learning this history of democracy in this country. I'm only been living here a few years. I come from the United States, where everybody is taught that democracy, comes from the founding fathers who created the Declaration of Independence, Constitution. And the amazing thing is, if you actually look at the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, it doesn't say anything about America being a democracy. No one ever talks about this. And if you look at it, and you figure out why, you read the original documents, you realize that actually those guys hated democracy. They said so all the time. I actually saw the opening speech of the Constitutional Convention, where people gathered together to create the American Constitution. And the first speech is by Governor of Virginia. He says, we've got a real problem in this country. There's a real danger of democracy breaking out. There's democratic elements in a lot of the local constitutions. We've got to do something about this. What are we going to do to prevent democracy? We need to create a federal system, so forth and so on. So the entire constitutional project is an attempt explicitly to suppress democracy. Now, what do they mean by democracy? Well, they meant this. They meant people sitting around in squares, publicly discussing what to do and brainstorming ideas and resolving their own problems in an equal fashion. And why were they against it? They said very blatantly. I mean, John Adams, who was I think the third president, said, well, one man, one vote? Well, that's insane. You can't have democracy. We have like 10 million people with no property and 1 million people with property. What do you think's going to happen if you give these guys the vote? They're going to appropriate us right away. So they made very clear that there's no way you can have real democracy if you have vast inequalities of wealth without people actually taking, undoing the inequalities of wealth. Now, what they have done over the last 200 years is figure out a way, A, to take these institutions which were basically created to stop democracy and convince everybody they are democracy, and B, to get people more and more involved in the system, since gradually they did expand it to one man, one vote, and still somehow not have them do the thing everybody was afraid that they were going to do in the beginning, which is expropriate the wealth. It's been one of the, millions and millions of very ingenious people have been working on how to do this for years. It's one of the greatest feats of propaganda ever done, but it's ultimately backed up by force. And the moment you really seriously challenge it, well, we all see what happens. And the story of what actually happened historically is really not been told. Because we have this idea that we have these people who have just always been sort of these nature people, don't have politics of their own. But actually, you know, when European settlers showed up in North America, what they really encountered was the result of hundreds of years of democratic movements within Native American societies. There are these vast kingdoms, you know, in the Mississippian civilization, they're called, with caste systems, hierarchical, human sacrifice. Those things were overthrown. And they were overthrown by popular movements that we're only now beginning to understand that happened within indigenous societies, which then created a remarkably individualistic and egalitarian democratic system. I mean, a lot of the Enlightenment was actually borrowed from Native Americans directly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Question to you.
Oh yes, please.
What do you think of systems like liquid democracy and other sort of internet sort of based democratic systems, if you know any, like delegated democracy, things like that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, should I answer the direct answer?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
okay,
that's cool.
In this case, don't have much of a direct answer. I haven't really studied them. I mean, in my experience, social media, internet-based forms of democracy, they're really useful for spreading information and coordinating things, but I've yet to see a really good way to frame and make decisions collectively that doesn't involve at some point people sitting down together. And I think that I think that the technology is really useful to get people into the spaces where they can sit down together, and you know, we can't have enough of that. But at some point, people have to look in each other's eyes.
Wanted to say that it's sort of following on what George said and other people have said about the fact that before we can have democracy, we really need the means to live. That's housing, that's food, that's education, to think. I mean, if you're hungry, then it's very difficult to think about the next, you know, think about things long term and to make decisions with other people. So I'm involved in something for basic income, which would be an income for everybody, every individual, and it's very important that it be for every individual because at the moment the benefit system is done by household, and what that does, and it's going to get it even worse with universal credit, where only one person in the household will be paid. All right, now just think about that.
pay.
All right, think about what that's going to mean for women and children. Think about what that's going to mean for people who do not have, you know, who are not being looked after in the family, because there's a big power difference within families as well as within society. So, basic income now.
Yeah.
All right.